I became a doctor because I wanted to save lives. That's what they tell you in medical school, right? That you're going to make a difference. That every patient matters. But nobody tells you about the ones you can't save. Nobody prepares you for the moment when you realize that sometimes the biggest battle isn't against disease or injury. Sometimes it's against a system that values money more than human life. My name is Dr. Michael Carson, and I work in the emergency department at St. Vincent's Hospital in downtown Philadelphia. I've been doing this for 12 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, car accidents that left families shattered. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on that cold November night when a mother walked through those doors carrying her dying son in her arms. It was around 2 in the morning. The ER was unusually quiet for a Friday night. I was finishing up paperwork on a patient we'd just admitted when I heard the automatic doors slide open. I looked up and saw her. A woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a thin jacket that was clearly not enough for the weather outside. Her jeans were worn at the knees and her sneakers had seen better days. But what caught my attention wasn't her clothes. It was the boy in her arms. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, small for his age, with dark hair matted against his forehead. His lips had a bluish tint that made my stomach drop. His breathing was shallow, labored, each breath seeming to take everything he had. The mother's eyes found mine across the waiting room, and in that single glance I saw pure desperation. Not panic, not hysteria, but the quiet, bone-deep terror of someone who knows they're running out of time. I was moving before I even realized it. Training takes over in moments like these. You don't think, you just act. I called for a gurney, and within seconds we had the boy on it, rushing him through to one of our trauma bays. As we moved, I fired questions at the mother who was running alongside us, her hand never leaving her son's. What's his name? How long has he been like this? Any known medical conditions? Her answers came in broken sentences, her voice shaking but determined. His name was Tyler. He'd been sick for 3 days, fever that wouldn't break, trouble breathing that kept getting worse. She'd given him children's medicine, tried everything she could at home, but nothing helped. She knew she needed to bring him in sooner, but she didn't have insurance. She'd been fired from her job at the diner 2 months ago when she'd missed too many shifts taking care of Tyler's younger sister, who had special needs. We got Tyler onto the examination table and I started my assessment while 2 nurses began hooking him up to monitors. His heart rate was through the roof. His oxygen saturation was dangerously low. His temperature was 104.3. When I listened to his lungs, I heard crackling sounds that told me exactly what we were dealing with. Pneumonia. Severe pneumonia that had progressed far beyond what should have been caught and treated days ago. This wasn't just a sick kid. This was a child whose body was shutting down. I turned to the mother, whose name I learned was Sarah, and I had to tell her the truth. Tyler was in critical condition. The infection had spread through both lungs. His body was going into septic shock, which meant his organs were starting to fail. We needed to act immediately. Aggressive antibiotics through IV, oxygen support, possibly even intubation if his breathing deteriorated further, and we needed to admit him to the pediatric intensive care unit. Sarah listened to every word, her face growing paler with each sentence. When I finished, she didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She just stood there, gripping the side of Tyler's bed so hard her knuckles turned white. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. How much would this cost? I wish I could say that money doesn't matter in medicine, that we treat everyone regardless of their ability to pay. And legally we do. We stabilize patients in emergency situations. But stabilizing isn't the same as treating. Stabilizing isn't the same as saving. I told Sarah as gently as I could that the hospital would work with her on payment plans, that there were programs that might help, that right now we just needed to focus on Tyler. But she shook her head. She'd been through this before with her daughter. She knew how it worked. The bills would come, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands by the time everything was said and done. Bills that would follow her for the rest of her life. Bills that would destroy any chance she had of ever getting back on her feet. But even as she said this, even as I watched her mentally calculating a debt she could never repay, she looked at her son lying there fighting for every breath, and she said something that has haunted me every single day since. She said, "I don't care about the money. I'll figure it out somehow. Just please don't give up on him." Those words hit me harder than any diagnosis I'd ever delivered. Don't give up on him. As if she thought there was even a possibility that I might. As if she'd been in situations before where people had given up because she couldn't pay. And the truly devastating part was that she wasn't wrong to worry. I'd seen it happen, not in emergency situations but in follow-up care, in preventive medicine, in all the small ways the system fails people who fall through the cracks. I looked at this woman who was asking me to save her child, while simultaneously apologizing for not being able to afford it, and something inside me broke. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that anyone else in that room would have noticed, but a small fundamental shift in how I saw my job, my oath, everything I thought I'd understood about medicine. I told Sarah that we were going to do everything possible for Tyler. Everything. And I meant it. We started him on broad-spectrum antibiotics immediately, the powerful ones we save for serious infections. We got him on high-flow oxygen. I called up to the PICU and made sure they had a bed ready. Then I did something I'd never done before in my 12 years as a doctor. I went to the hospital administrator on call that night, a man named Robert Chen who I'd always considered reasonable, and I told him that this case needed to be flagged as charity care immediately. No delays, no paperwork runaround, no waiting for Sarah to prove she qualified. I told him that if the hospital gave me any pushback on this, if anyone tried to transfer this kid to a county facility or do anything other than give him the absolute best care we had to offer, I would make it my personal mission to make sure every newspaper and news station in Philadelphia knew about it. Robert looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. Doctors don't threaten administrators. We don't make ultimatums. We work within the system, even when the system is broken. But I was tired. Tired of watching people suffer because they couldn't afford to be healthy. Tired of the mental gymnastics we all did to justify the way healthcare worked in this country. Tired of feeling helpless. Robert agreed, though I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The cost of treating Tyler versus the cost of bad publicity. In the end, the math worked in our favor, but it shouldn't have had to be about math at all. Tyler was admitted to the PICU within the hour. Over the next 3 days, he remained in critical condition. His fever wouldn't break. His oxygen levels kept dropping. We adjusted his medications, tried different combinations of antibiotics, monitored him around the clock. Sarah never left his side. She slept in a chair next to his bed, barely eating, barely speaking. The PICU nurses tried to get her to take breaks, to go to the cafeteria, to take care of herself, but she refused. She just sat there holding Tyler's hand, whispering things to him that I couldn't hear. I checked on Tyler every few hours, even when I wasn't technically on duty. I told myself it was because his case was complicated, because I wanted to ensure continuity of care, but the truth was simpler than that. I needed to know he was going to make it. I needed Sarah's faith in me to be justified. On the 4th day, something changed. Tyler's fever finally broke. His oxygen saturation started climbing. The infection markers in his blood began to drop. He wasn't out of danger yet, but he'd turned a corner. When I told Sarah, she closed her eyes and took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. Then she looked at me and said, "Thank you," in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I wanted to tell her she didn't need to thank me, that this was my job, that any doctor would have done the same. But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Tyler spent another week in the hospital. Each day he got a little stronger. The color came back to his face. He started sitting up, then eating, then asking for his iPad so he could play games. Sarah started to look less like someone bracing for the worst and more like someone who dared to hope. I watched their small victories and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride exactly, but purpose. The kind of purpose that reminded me why I'd wanted to become a doctor in the first place. When Tyler was finally discharged, I went to say goodbye. He was in a wheelchair, hospital policy for all patients leaving the building, even though he could walk fine now. He looked like a regular kid again. Small and skinny, sure, but his eyes were bright and he was laughing at something Sarah had said. When he saw me, he waved enthusiastically. Sarah stood up and walked over to me. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged me. Not a polite, brief hug, but a real one. The kind that says more than words ever could. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. She told me she'd gotten a call from the hospital billing department. They'd approved her for full financial assistance. The entire cost of Tyler's treatment, everything, was covered. She wouldn't owe a single dollar. She couldn't believe it. She kept saying it over and over. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. I smiled and told her I was glad. Told her Tyler deserved the best care regardless of circumstances. Told her to take care of themselves. But I didn't tell her about my conversation with Robert. I didn't tell her about the calls I'd made to patient advocacy services, about the forms I'd personally walked through administrative offices to make sure they didn't get lost in the system. Some things didn't need to be said. They left that afternoon and I thought that would be the end of the story. A good outcome. A life saved. A mother's faith rewarded. I went back to my regular rotation, saw hundreds of other patients, dealt with dozens of other emergencies. Life in the ER moved on the way it always does, one crisis blending into the next. But something had changed in me. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. The patients who waited until their conditions were critical because they were afraid of the cost. The ones who asked about prices before agreeing to tests. The parents who looked at their sick children with the same expression Sarah had worn. That mixture of love and desperation and fear that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with money. I'd always known the system was broken, but I'd accepted it as an unchangeable reality. Now I couldn't. 6 months after Tyler was discharged, I got a letter at the hospital. It was from Sarah. She'd found a new job, one with benefits. Tyler was doing great, back in school, playing soccer, being a normal 7-year-old. His little sister was thriving too. Sarah wrote that she thought about that night in the ER all the time, about how close they'd come to losing Tyler, about how I'd fought for him. She said she'd learned something important through the whole experience. That sometimes asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's an act of love. That advocating for the people we care about, even when we feel powerless, matters more than we know. She thanked me again, and then she wrote something at the end that I've kept with me ever since. She wrote, "You gave me my son back. But more than that, you showed me that there are still people in this world who see us as human beings first, not dollar signs. That means more than you'll ever know." I've read that letter probably 100 times. It sits in my desk drawer at work, and whenever I have a particularly hard shift, whenever I feel myself becoming numb to the suffering around me, I take it out and read it again. Tyler's case changed how I practice medicine. I became more vocal about patient advocacy. I started volunteering with organizations that help uninsured families navigate the healthcare system. I pushed back harder when administrators made decisions based purely on financial considerations. Did I make enemies? Probably. Did I risk my career at times? Maybe. But I also slept better at night. I'd entered medicine to save lives, and I'd discovered that sometimes saving a life means fighting battles that have nothing to do with disease. It means standing up to a system that treats healthcare as a commodity rather than a right. It means remembering that behind every patient ID number and insurance claim is a human being with a story, with people who love them, with a fundamental right to be treated with dignity. I still work in the emergency department at St. Vincent's. I still see cases that break my heart. I still deal with a healthcare system that often feels designed to fail the people who need it most. But I also see victories. Small ones mostly. A family that gets connected with resources they didn't know existed. A patient whose medication costs get reduced through assistance programs. A child who gets the treatment they need regardless of their parents' ability to pay. These victories don't make headlines. They don't fix the systemic problems, but they matter to the people involved. They mattered to Tyler and Sarah. They matter to me. When I think back to that November night, to the moment Sarah asked me not to give up on her son, I realize she was asking me to do more than just provide medical care. She was asking me to see them, to acknowledge their humanity, to remember that my oath as a doctor isn't conditional on insurance coverage or bank account balances. It's a promise to serve, to heal, to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. I became a doctor to save lives, but Tyler taught me what that really means. It's not just about clinical skills or medical knowledge. It's about recognizing that healing happens at the intersection of medicine and humanity, where science meets compassion, where technical expertise is guided by fundamental respect for human dignity. Every patient who walks through those ER doors deserves that. Every single one. And if I've learned anything from Sarah and Tyler, it's that sometimes the most important medicine we can provide is simply refusing to give up, even when everything else seems stacked against success. That's the kind of doctor I want to be. That's the kind of doctor I'm still learning to become. And it all started with a mother who had nothing to offer except love for her son, and the courage to ask a stranger not to give up hope.